I found in my investigation. I found via Mickey Keenan's affidavit he had engaged in some coercive tactics, namely one in making Corey Hyde an informant for him.
What coercive tactics are these?
Well, for starters, in Keenan's affidavit, he was pretty clear about the fact that on one instance, he had approached Corey Hyde and essentially threatened her into working as an informant.
Do you know, to the best of your knowledge, how did Corey Hyde respond?
Well, I certainly could not find any information regarding any reason that Corey Hyde would have been convicted or anything to be afraid of for being threatened for. So she was essentially, according to what I could get from her affidavit, very surprised at these accusations.
Was Corey Hyde the only person that Mickey Keenan used coercive tactics on?
No, I also found evidence that Mickey Keenan used coercive tactics on Avery Bancroft himself.
How so?
Well, namely on a meeting on April 13th, there was a meeting including Corey Hyde, Avery Bancroft, Mickey Keenan, and Chase Covington. And during a moment of awkward silence at this meeting, as it was described, Mickey Keenan took a pen and a napkin and slid it across the table to Avery Bancroft.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, Miss Lorraine, how did Mr. Bancroft respond?
Originally, he wiped his face with it.
And to the best of your knowledge, how did Officer Mickey Keenan respond this time?
Again, after the first attempt failed, Officer Keenan took another pen and another napkin and slid it across the table to Mr. Bancroft again, but this time said, "It's always about the money."
Now, Miss Lorraine, when reviewing the document, could you find any evidence whatsoever to suggest that Mr. Bancroft was predisposed?
Actually, no. In all of my investigation, I could not find any predisposition that Mr. Bancroft had been engaging in, was engaging in, or was likely to engage in any sort of bribery. Based on what I found, Mickey Keenan came up with the entire scheme.
Could you find any evidence, any statements, any testimony to suggest that Mr. Avery Bancroft was not predisposed in today's case?
Well, on one instance, Corey Hyde made it very clear that right before a scheduled meeting between Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington, Avery Bancroft had said, "That's it, I'm sick of being Keenan's pawn."
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bean. Is there a cross-examination for the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Robbins, you may proceed.
So, Ms. Lorraine, you are getting paid for your testimony here today, correct?
Yes, I am. We have a standard rate at my company, Greylord Strategies, that I've been paid for my work on this case as of any.
And you've already been paid $20,000 for your work on this case, correct?
But yes, that's the standard rate that we charge that I just mentioned.
And you are being paid this by the defendant's counsel here today?
Yes.
And to talk about your 2014 audit, you conducted this audit on the compliance techniques for the MSPD on undercover guidelines, correct?
Yes, the undercover guidelines were given by the U.S. Attorney General for basic undercover operations and guidelines, essentially. But my audit, or our audit, was done in 2014 specifically on the MSPD's use of these guidelines and compliance with.
And your report was not favorable towards the MSPD?
Well, unfortunately, no. We found in this audit that the MSPD was not complying with many of the things that they said that they adopted in 2010 when they adopted the undercover guidelines themselves.
But these compliance guidelines are not mandatory, correct?
Well, back in the 1980s, there were several issues with investigations of this kind, and so in the 90s, the Attorney General created these and suggested them for all police departments to take up. And 2010 is when the MSPD originally adopted these.
Right, so they are recommended, but they are not mandatory.
This is true.
Okay. And so Officer Keenan's undercover operation began in 2013.
Correct. This is also true.
And before your 2014 audit.
Yes.
So would you say Officer Keenan was then operating under the guidelines that he thought were most appropriate?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
As to Mr. Keenan's thought process?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Lorraine did not testify as to the thought process of Officer Mickey Keenan. She can only testify as to whether or not he was in compliance with the practices of 2014. Not so that it's 2013, as that document has not been entered into evidence and is not part of the case documents for today's case.
Do you have a response on speculation, Ms. Roberts?
I can rephrase your question if that's...
Okay, well, we'll rephrase the question, temporarily sustained, and we'll strike the testimony and agree to those testimony.
Yes, Your Honor.
So Officer Keenan had the approval of Police Chief Kimball for his operation, correct?
Correct. He did get authorization from his police chief. However, the undercover guidelines, as adopted in 2010 by the MSPD and audited again in 2014, say that an officer must have authorization by an upper-level officer. However, Officer Chief Kimball did not meet the requirement to fulfill this recommendation. This needed to be authorized by the district attorney or someone at that level.
Correct. But for Officer Keenan's purposes, he did have some sort of approval from a higher power.
Yes, from Officer Kimball.
And to talk about your report, you said in your report that experts can often rely on old reports. And I'm sorry, let me rephrase. You talked about confirmation bias in your report and how experts can use prior reports to confirm things in new reports.
Yes, sort of. Confirmation bias is essentially when a criminalist already has preconceived notions or thoughts or expectations as to what they may find after their investigation. So essentially they would have bias before conducting their investigation, therefore causing them to look for something specific in their investigation. It's bias, so it's not really objective.
Correct. And so you said that when experts use old reports in their new findings, they can often lead to this sort of bias.
I'm sorry? Oh, yes, to the bias. Yes. Consider yes.
And you used your 2014 audit in your work for the defense for this case, did you not?
Yes. That is how I evaluated the MSPD's investigative strategy.
I'm sorry, let me re-ask the question. You used your audit to help you determine, to help you look at Officer Keenan's, whether or not Officer Keenan was acting inappropriately in his case against Mr. Bancroft.
Oh, yes. The audit was a set of recommendations for the MSPD to start complying better with in their use of undercover operations. And this being an undercover operation by the MSPD, we used the audit to see if they continue to comply with these recommendations that we provided to them.
No more questions.
Thank you, Ms. Roberts. Is there a redirect examination for the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Now, Ms. Lorraine, do you recall questions on cross-examination concerning unconscious bias?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Lorraine, do you work with other people in your company?
Certainly, I am only the chief auditor. I'm not the only one.
So other people did work with you on this case?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. I just asked that the witness be allowed to step down.
You may. Thank you for your time, Ms. Does the state have any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Ms. Corey Hyde to stand.
All right, Ms. Hyde. Ms. Nancy, on my right. Remember, you have this one.
Yes, Your Honor. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Corey Hyde.
And could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Ms. Hyde?
Well, I graduated from Miami University in Ohio, and now I live in Midland City, Midland.
What is it that you do for work here?
Primarily, I work at the Black Bear Casino as Avery Bancroft's executive assistant. But as my side project, I am the proud owner of Miss Corey Hyde's Hair Extension Emporium, where we believe in you.
And who is Avery Bancroft?
Oh, Mr. Bancroft is my boss.
And as the executive assistant to Avery Bancroft, what is it that you do?
Well, I do normal assistant things like answering phone calls, scheduling meetings with people like Shannon Stark and Chase Covington, even little things like getting them some of their favorite foods. I tried to get them on that cornbread and collard green kick, but it wasn't budging.
Who is Chase Covington?
Miss Covington is one of the 3 chairs on the Midlands Gambling Commission. She comes into the casino all the time and does a lot of gambling. She doesn't win a whole lot, but, you know, it goes that way sometimes.
And you were talking about March 2nd, correct? Why was this date important to you?
Well, that's the day that I got a call from Mr. Mickey Keenan, who told me that he was an auditor for the Midlands Gambling Commission. He wanted me to meet with him in his office to talk about the second casino proposal.
And how did this meeting, what was said in this meeting?
Well, it started off pretty normal and pleasant. We talked about Mr. Bancroft and I's proposal and the requirements for the bid, but then the conversation took a turn for the worst.
What do you mean it took a turn for the worse?
We started talking about possible gambling violations against my boss and I was taken aback because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong and neither had my boss from what I knew, so I told him I didn't know what he was talking about.
And what happened when you denied his allegations?
Well, that's when he showed me his badge from the Midland State Police Department and told me it would be in my best interest to cooperate with him. So I decided to help the police.
And what were you asked to do as you were helping the police?
Well, the plan was to catch Mr. Bancroft bribing Miss Covington to get the license for the second casino.
And what exactly was your role in this plan?
Well, my job was to set up meetings between Mr. Keenan, Miss Covington, and Mr. Bancroft, and I had no problem doing that, considering it was part of my job anyway.
And when was this first meeting that you set up?
The first meeting that I set up was on March 31st, 2015, and that was with myself, Mr. Keenan, and Mr. Bancroft. It only lasted about 20 minutes, but Mr. Keenan had me wear a wire to record the whole thing.
And what happened at this meeting?
Well, nothing significant. I mean, every time we hinted toward the word bribe, Mr. Bancroft just smiled, nodded, and suggested we talk about it another day.
Did you talk about it another day?
Well, actually, yes. We had another meeting a couple weeks later, as a matter of fact. But this time, Miss Covington was there, too. Remember, this meeting was special because we had to have security measures put into place.
What kind of security measures?
Well, before the meeting, Mr. Bancroft did a sweep of the room to make sure it wasn't wired and that there were no hidden cameras to record what was happening. Oh, and the hotel security guard, Mr. Danny Hoy, had to pat everyone down before we entered the room for the meeting.
And what happened at this meeting?
Well, Mr. Bancroft mainly just talked about his casino proposal and things like that, but after everything he said, Ms. Covington asked what was in it for her, because she had another proposal on her desk and needed $250,000 reasons to vote in favor of my boss.
What was Mr. Bancroft's reaction to her asking this question?
Well, he said that that was a lot of reasons, but he would see what he could do before the next time we all met.
And what was Officer Keenan's participation in this meeting?
Well, there wasn't really much of it. Mr. Bancroft and Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Covington did most of the talking. He did hold a room service, though, and after that, Ms. Covington left faster than the stuff at a Thanksgiving dinner.
And when was the next meeting that you had?
Well, our last meeting was on April 16, 2015. I went into Mr. Bancroft's office to get him that day when I saw him putting stacks and stacks of money into a briefcase. I've never even seen that much money counting tithe to church. But before I had time to ask him about it, he said, there's no turning back now. Let's go. And we went to find Ms. Covington and Mr. Keenan.
Were all four of you present at this meeting?
Actually, no. Ms. Covington never showed up. After a while, Mr. Keenan went to use the bathroom, and that's when Mr. Bancroft decided to leave, too.
When was the next time that you saw Mr. Bancroft?
Later on, he showed up with the briefcase, and I asked if he had found Miss Covington. I thought everything was ruined, but he said everything had been taken care of, and that there was no need for the auditor, Mr. Mickey Keenan.
Earlier you said that you had walked in seeing Mr. Bancroft putting stacks and stacks of money into a briefcase. At the time, was Mr. Bancroft on the phone?
No, he wasn't on the phone with anyone.
Was Mr. Keenan in the room with him?
No, Mr. Keenan wasn't there.
Was Miss Covington?
Miss Covington wasn't there either.
Was anybody else in the room with Mr. Bancroft at this time?
No, from what I could tell, it was just Mr. Bancroft and the stacks of money.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde.
Is there a cross-examination for this witness? Yes, Your Honor. You can proceed when you're ready.
Ms. Hyde, you met with someone who you thought was an auditor, right?
Yes, Mr. Mickey Keenan.
That's right. Mickey Keenan and you met on March 2nd, as you said, on direct examination.
Yes, we did.
Now, when you and Mickey Keenan met, you met at your office in the casino.
Yes.
And while you were in the room, you started talking, small talk with Officer Keenan about your past, right?
Well, yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff, especially with Mr. Bancroft and my proposal.
That's right. And at one point, Officer Keenan actually slid his badge across the table, didn't he?
Well, yes, he did show me that he was a police officer, and he showed me his badge to make sure, I believed it.
And he told you that you had violated gambling laws in the past, right?
Well, yes, and that's why I was so taken aback, because as a God-fearing woman, I would never do anything unethical.
That's right. You, in your words, didn't do anything wrong. You didn't violate any of those laws, right?
Oh, of course not.
But Officer Keenan lied and said you did.
Well, yes, he did.
So he told you that you have to work with him, right?
Well, yes, he wanted me to work with him, and I had no problem, because once I knew he was a police officer, I knew it would be the right thing to help the law.
So after Officer Keenan threatened you, you decided to go through with his investigation, right?
Yes, I did decide to help the police.
The plan was to catch Chase Covington accepting a bribe from Avery Bancroft, right?
Yes, that was the plan.
That's what Officer Keenan told you.
Yes, that was the plan, yes.
And he made you set up several meetings between the two of them.
Well, he didn't make me, but he did suggest that I set up meetings, which I had no problem with, considering it was part of my job anyway.
So that's a yes, you did actually set up meetings with Avery Bancroft, Chase Covington, and Officer Keenan, correct?
Yes, I did set up those meetings.
And yourself.
Oh, of course, I was at.
Now, in the months leading up to these meetings, you actually started to get cold feet, right? Started to get nervous.
Well, yes, I didn't feel very good about going behind Mr. Bancroft's back.
That's right. You didn't actually want to go through with this part of the investigation, right?
No, I was having some doubts, but, I realized that if justice needed to be served, this was the right thing to do.
So, you went back, and you talked to Officer Keenan first, right?
Yes, I did tell him about my concerns. He wasn't my partner in this.
You told him, I'm not sure, I don't know if I want to go through with this, right?
Yes, that was back when I was questioning.
And Officer Keenan turned around, he looked at you, and he said, backing out now would be the worst decision of your life, right?
Well, yes, at that point we were pretty far into the investigation, and, I didn't want to ruin everything by backing out.
So he told you that, correct?
Yes, he did.
So you agreed to say?
Yes, I did agree to say. I knew that it would be the right thing to do.
So, the next meeting you attended was on April 13th, 2015 with Officer Keenan, Avery Bancroft, and Chase Covington?
Yes.
And in this meeting, you told us on direct examination that you saw the two of them, Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington, having a conversation.
Well, of course they were talking during the meeting.
That's right, they were talking about the proposal.
Yes, they were at the beginning.
And Avery Bancroft was trying to convince Chase Covington to accept his proposal, right?
Well, yes, he was pitching his proposal.
That's right, he was talking about the casino slots, the amount of money you bring in, correct?
Oh, yes, all kinds of business things.
And all of a sudden, Mickey Keenan looked at you, looked back at Avery Bancroft, and said, you need to pitch more than just ideas to Chase Covington, didn't he?
He did say that, yes.
And Avery Bancroft, he hesitated, didn't he?
Well, it seemed at first, but, he did, eventually do what Mr. Keenan was saying.
So that's a yes to my question. Avery Bancroft first hesitated?
Yes, I think there was a little bit of it.
And then he said, I'll see what I can do. right?
Yes, he did say that.
Now, on the April 16th meeting, that was the final meeting scheduled, right?
Yes, at least that's what I know. That's the final meeting I scheduled.
That's the final meeting Mickey Keenan told you to schedule?
Right.
For Avery Bancroft, Chase Covington, yourself, and Mickey Keenan, right?
Yes, we were all supposed to be there, but Ms. Covington never showed up.
Exactly. Ms. Covington never showed up to this last meeting, right?
No, at least not when, it was scheduled. I don't know if she ever showed up anywhere else.
And at one point, when Ms. Covington wasn't there, Mickey Keenan went to the bathroom, right?
Yes, and that's when Mr. Bancroft decided to leave too.
That's right. When Mr. Keenan was in the bathroom, Avery Bancroft left the room.
Yes, he did.
And when Mickey Keenan came out of the bathroom, well, he was furious, wasn't he?
Well, of course, things weren't going according to plan, and he was a bit of a hothead at times.
He was a bit of a hothead. He was actually livid, in your words, right?
Yes, he was quite upset that things weren't working out.
And he looked at you and he said, if you don't find Chase Covington and Avery Bancroft, you're going to jail. Didn't he say that?
He did say that, and I was very surprised because, like I said, I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, and the only place I was going was heaven.
No further questions, John.
Is there a redirect examination?
There is no redirect. Your Honor, we shall have to witness the meeting last step down.
She may. Thank you for your time, Ms. Hyde.
Thank you.
Does the state have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Warren to the stand.
All right, Dr. Warren. Stands on my right. Remember your numbers.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, you can proceed when you're ready.
Could you please state your name?
Hi, I'm Dr. Reese Warren.
Doctor. Are you a medical doctor, or do you hold a PhD in a particular field?
No, I'm not a medical doctor. If I was, I wouldn't be driving a 2004 Buick. I'm actually a linguist. I have a PhD from Georgetown University.
Are you published in the field of linguistics?
I am. I'm quite published, actually. I have 37 peer-reviewed articles in both linguistics and psychology journals, 3 books on the same subject. But my crowning achievement is that I've literally written the book on linguistics. My textbook, How to Talk to Alleged Criminals, is currently in its 5th edition as a standard textbook at police academies nationwide, including the one here in Midlands.
Do you have a specialty within the larger umbrella of linguistics?
I do. I am currently the department head at Midland State University in linguistics, and there I teach on 3 wonderful subjects. Forensic linguistics, forensic psychology, and the application of linguistics to the law. I've been teaching on those subjects for about the past 10 years now.
Would you mind explaining to us exactly what forensic linguistics is?
Sure. Forensic linguistics itself is broken down into 2 primary parts. There's linguistics, which is the study of languages, the words we say, the sounds we make, and the meaning that we impart on it. Now, when you apply forensics to the mix, that's how the police are able to understand what their officers, defendants, and victims alike are annotating their speech. So a rather up-and-coming field in modern police work.
Are you here today in court testifying in your capacity as a forensic linguist?
I am.
And so let's talk about today's case then.
Okay.
How and when were you contacted to testify?
I was contacted about mid-July by the Breckinridge County's Attorney's Office, and I was asked to analyze the conversation between the defendant, Avery Bancroft, the defendant's assistant, Corey Hyde, and the undercover officer, Mickey Keenan.
Were you yourself present for this conversation between the undercover officer, the defendant, and his assistant?
No, I wasn't present.
Doctor, how did you go about analyzing a conversation that you weren't even present for?
Well, I was provided an audio recording of that conversation by the Midland State Police Department. Then from that recording, I created a transcript of the conversation.
Is it unusual for experts such as yourself to rely upon transcripts that they made?
No, it's not. It's actually a common practice. Most of the time, linguists are hired after the fact, so having audio recordings and transcripts are often and usually the most accurate and reliable pieces of information when it comes to conversations. It's straight from the horse's mouth, as they would say.
Do you recognize the copy of that transcript if I showed it to you today here in court?
Yes, I would.
You just have to.
Richmond to approach the witness, Your Honor, with Exhibit 8.
You may.
Not a problem. Can you tell me what I just handed you?
This is a copy of that transcript I was referring to earlier.
How do you recognize it?
Well, since I created this document, it does look rather familiar.
Well, has it been changed or altered in any way since you created it?
No, it is not.
Finally, did you rely upon this when coming to your expert conclusions in today's case?
Yes, I did.
All right, this time I moved into evidence which has been pre-marked with Exhibit 8, as the people say.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
This shall be State's A.
Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Warren, how did you go about analyzing this transcript?
Well, I use a process called topic content analysis. And then from that analysis, I use the RID method to analyze and categorize the words that were spoken.
You mentioned the RID method. Is that a standalone term or an acronym?
Well, it's an acronym that we created at Midland State University. It's the three primary ways that an individual will attempt to direct the control and direction of conversation: repetition, introduction, and diversion. RID.
How did you go about applying repetition, introduction, diversion, or the RID method to this case?
Well, I would look for instances of repetitionary language, introductionary language, or diversionary language. I would note the speaker who said them, the manner in which they were said, and the inflection.
Let's start with that first one, repetition. What instances of repetition did you notice throughout that document?
Well, I noticed that both the undercover officer and the defendant used repetitionary language. Officer Keenan referred primarily to business matters, whether or not there be a conference space, square footage of the casino, matters like that.
Let's compare that to the defendant. What sorts of repetition did the defendant demonstrate?
Now, the defendant, on the other hand, referred primarily to doing whatever it takes to get his bid passed, greasing the wheels of the commission, so to speak.
Why did you look for something like repetition when studying this transcript?
Well, repetitionary language itself is primarily used by an individual with a topic that they find rather important. That's why they keep repeating those topics in a conversation, and in essence, keeping it alive.
Let's move on to introduction. Can you tell us what sorts of introduction you noticed within that transcript?
Well, this time all three speakers used introductionary language. Now, what I thought was rather interesting was as the conversation progressed from casino specifics to later a bribe with Chase Covington, the defendant brought up Chase Covington, brought up that she's the head in the swing vote of the State Gambling Commission, and then later brought up setting up an additional meeting with Ms. Covington.
Why did you look for introduction when evaluating this transcript?
Well, introductionary language has been recognized to be used whenever an individual wants to introduce a new topic to the conversation. It's when they want to change the way the direction's going.
And that final one, I believe it was diversion. Can you tell us where you found diversion within this conversation?
Well, that's one that was rather remarkable. There actually wasn't any diversionary language in this conversation. Now, typically in a conversation, when it progresses to an area that an individual finds displeasing, they'll use diversionary language or just throwaway topics to change the conversation. So that's matters like the weather, local sports teams like our very own Midland Mets, or even simply saying, no, I'm uncomfortable with this topic. Mr. Bancroft didn't use any of that in this conversation.
Where did you look for diversionary language?
Well, I looked specifically at the moment when the conversation changed towards a bribe. And then I also looked at further instances wherever a bribe was mentioned back up in the conversation. Again, no diversionary language was used by Mr. Bancroft.
Can you tell us what you, as a forensic linguist, was able to learn from this conversation?
Well, I was able to determine that as the conversation progressed from casino specifics to later a bribe, that the defendant brought up Chase Covington, brought up that she's the swing vote of the State Gambling Commission, and then later brought up setting up an additional meeting to facilitate a bribe with Ms. Covington.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Ms. Bean, is there a cross-examination?
Yes, there is, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good evening, Dr. Warren.
Good evening.
Now, Dr. Warren, I'm going to ask you a series of questions.
Okay.
Now, to begin with, Dr. Warren, you have a substantial relationship with the MSPD, or the Midland State Police Department. Isn't that right?
I guess so. It's not uncommon to see myself while hobbling around the campus of the police academy, especially with this blue belt.
That's right. It's especially not uncommon to see you hobbling around at the Midland State Police Department because you lecture there. Isn't that right?
At the police academy, yes. I have a lecture circuit where I go around to numerous police academies across the country. With the police academy just being down the road from Midland State, it's not uncommon to see me.
But redirecting you back to my question, you do routinely lecture at the MSPD specifically, correct?
At the police academy, yes.
And you also have a book that is currently a standard text at the MSPD. Isn't that right?
Yes, how to talk to alleged criminals.
And you're also aware of the fact that Officer Mickey Keenan is a member of the MSPD?
Yes, he's one of Midland's boys in blue.
And you're aware of this fact because you reviewed the affidavits of Corey Hyde and Mickey Keenan, correct?
That's correct.
And you're also aware of an email exchange that occurred between Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde?
Yes.
Let the record reflect that I am showing opposing counsel what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 18. May I approach?
You may.
Would Your Honor like to see the copy?
It's unnecessary.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Let the record now reflect that I am handing the witness what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 18. Now, you recognize this, don't you?
I do. This is that email exchange between Ms. Hyde and Officer Keenan.
That's right. And you're familiar with this email exchange because you reviewed it for coercive behavior on the part of Mickey Keenan, correct?
That I did.
And this document has not been changed or altered in any way?
No, it is not.
So this is, in fact, a true and accurate copy, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, we would now like to offer into evidence that has been pre-marked as Exhibit 18. Its authenticity has been stipulated to.
Any other objections from the defense?
No, Your Honor. Oh, no, Your Honor.
With that, it shall be moved into evidence as defense A.
Now, coaching was a concern between Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde, wasn't it?
It is. Whenever a police officer uses an informant in their investigation, a linguist is always looking out for coaching and coaching tactics that are used by the police.
That's right. And one of the coaching tactics that you found in this document was the fact that Keenan used multiple phrases and topics for conversation from this email in the meeting that occurred on the meeting that occurred within that transcript, correct?
Yes. Officer Keenan emailed Ms. Hyde with a couple of talking points to use in the meeting the next day.
That's right. And one of those talking points involves him telling her to do something to sweeten the pot, correct?
Correct.
And he also made it very clear that it was important that this came from Corey Hyde and not himself.
That's also correct.
And later on during the meeting that occurred within that transcript, didn't Corey Hyde say, we need to do something to sweeten the pot?
Yes, she actually says those words verbatim. That's what a linguist would call a textbook example.
That's right. In fact, this is an example of textbook coaching in your own words.
It is an example of textbook coaching. Usually, you normally don't see that the informant says the exact words, word for word. That's normally left for academia.
And later on, at the end of the email, one of the other talking points that was brought up by Mickey Keenan was this specifically. Avery needs to realize that someone needs to be made happy, and that someone is Chase Covington, correct?
Yes, in the conversation.
That's right. And in the conversation that occurred in the transcript, didn't Corey Hyde ask, who do we need to make happy?
Yes, both Officer Keenan and Ms. Hyde were hinting towards a bribe with Chase Covington for Mr. Bancroft to latch on to.
That's right. And that's why, throughout the rest of the conversation, Keenan repeated the phrase, who do we need to make happy, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation as to why Officer Keenan did something.
Response will speak.
Your Honor, this is based on his rationally based perception. As a forensic linguist, he is trying to testify today that the MSPD used the best possible practices, and is trying to testify today as to why they use these practices. For that reason, it's not speculation, it's merely based off of what he can glean from the transcript of the standing support.
Response to Sullivan.
Your Honor, there's actually been a pre-trial motion on this exact subject, Your Honor, if I may approach with it, so Your Honor to reference it.
You may. What am I looking at here, Ms. Sullivan?
Your Honor, this is a pre-trial order that's already been ruled on by a previous judge, Your Honor. It tells us that while Dr. Warren is an expert in the field of forensic linguistics, he cannot testify to something such as intent. That is the exact wording of this pretrial order, Your Honor. And having Dr. Warren testifying to the intent with which Officer Keenan did something violates this pretrial order.
Your Honor, may I take a moment to go back to the counsel table to see a copy of this pretrial order?
Of course. And just briefly before you do, Ms. Bean, make sure that this is the order that we're talking about, so we're on the same page.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, perfect.
Ms. Bean, I actually have an extra copy if you would.
That would be lovely. Carlos, never mind. Mr. Zapata. Thank you, Mr. Zapata.
I think we're talking about 5 lines from the bottom of the second paragraph.
Yes, Your Honor.
Given this motion, how do you distinguish your argument, Ms. Bean? So how does the statement that you're going to not go to the intent of, in this case, Mickey Keenan? Because if it does go to intent, then I think the motion is clear.
Your Honor, we are not trying to get him to say what the intent of Mickey Keenan was in today's case. We are not asking him to testify as the inner thoughts or the inner desires or the inner intent of Mickey Keenan. What we are trying to say in today's case is that we're not trying to prove the intent of why he did this. We're trying to ask him why he thinks that this was a best practice used by the Midland State Police Department.
Response, Ms. Hollowell?
Your Honor, the exact question that was asked was Officer Keenan did this as to, asking this witness why Officer Keenan performed this specific action and what he intended to happen as a result of that action. That goes directly to Officer Keenan's intent with acting, and therefore is inadmissible in the state's case.
I tend to agree that the phrasing of the question, as it was asked, does call for the witness to testify as to Officer Keenan's intent. There may be certain questions that elicit the information that you just proffered that don't run that risk. Just as a matter of fact, moving forward, I'm also not convinced that merely proving that the witness's rationally based perception is a sufficient argument to this and similar issues, because rationally based perceptions are left to the purview of lay witnesses, and while he's allowed to reach lay conclusions, there's risk of confusing the jury as to which conclusions hold the weight of expert testimony and which conclusions he's making as just a lay witness familiar with the facts. So the objection's sustained, but there's a way to get this in.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may
Yes, Your
proceed.
Honor. Officer Keenan pivoted off that phrase and repeated the phrase, "Who do we need to make happy?" multiple times in that transcript, didn't he?
Yes, he said that phrase specifically several times in the conversation.
Now, referring to the transcript itself, you admit yourself that transcript analysis is a low-tech analysis?
Well, a transcript analysis itself isn't incredibly fancy. There's not a lot of machinery involved. It's just analyzing the words in the conversation.
So that's a yes to my question. It is a low-tech analysis.
Yes.
And you are aware of the fact that 57% of the topics and phrases that were brought up in that conversation came from both Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde, correct?
True.
And you're also aware that throughout the conversation, Mickey Keenan said at one point on the transcript specifically, "Now, we need to make sure to make Chase happy," correct?
Yes, again, both Officer Keenan and Ms. Hyde were trying to hint at the possibility of a bribe with Chase Covington to see if Mr. Bancroft would go along with it.
And he also said specifically, "You need to pitch more than ideas," correct?
Yes.
Now, furthermore, this is a transcript analysis, correct?
Yes.
So you did not see a video recording of this conversation?
No, all I had were the words that were spoken.
So you can't testify to the facial expressions?
No.
You can't testify to the hand gestures?
Again, no.
You cannot testify to the body language?
No, just the words and the way they were spoken.
You cannot testify to the position of the people and the way that they were set up in the room, can you?
No.
All you can testify to is the words that were written on that page.
You have the words and the way they said them, the inflection, the annotations.
Lastly, you cannot testify in court today whether or not entrapment occurred, can you?
Well, I can't say specifically whether or not Ms. Bancroft was entrapped, but I can say the policies that were used by the Midland State Police Department and the mayor.
But redirecting me back to my question, you cannot testify as to whether or not entrapment actually occurred, can you?
No, I'm not a psychologist.
That's right, and you can't do that because you're not qualified to testify to that in court today, can you?
No, I believe there was some sort of pretrial document in court or something like that where they said I could do that.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions. May I publish the exhibit to the jury?
You may. Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, is there a redirect examination for the witness?
No, Your Honor, may I just speak?
Thank you for your time, Doctor.
Your Honor, the next witness is supposed to be Tracy Menezes. He got stuck at the racetrack. Heard it was quite a good race. So, Your Honor, if you wouldn't mind breaking... I'm sorry? Really? He said it'll be in a minute, right?
If you have this, maybe I'll put you
There's so many options.
What's the issue?
Would Your Honor mind taking... So we take a recess now, Your Honor. We've already done 3 witnesses.
True.
This would be almost a halfway point.
We can recess now, we can continue on and come back to Tracy Menendez, whatever the counselors would like to do.
I don't have a particular preference, however, we wouldn't be calling Thomas next then if we can't get the break because we need a demo downstairs. We would call Bancroft or Hyde. Or we can take a break.
Do we have the demo right now?
No, that's why I have to go downstairs, but that's for her direct. Everyone else we can run if we want to run one more witness, I don't know.
Okay, so we'll take a break right now then.
Okay, we'll take an 8-minute break, we'll be back at 8:30.
I'm not looking at it.
Oh, what? It wasn't even working like 3/4 of the time.
Section 5.
Yeah,
Section 8.
Yeah.
I feel like part I got that because like it's not like an angle grid. I feel like I can see it like that.
Yeah, like you see like the picture.
Indeed. I blame Carlos.
Is it fixed?
You're good. Good. That's like a national three? Yeah. Like a national
Eric showed that video.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember that line, I'm like,
Yeah, no, we took it.
I was like, oh my god, you guys took this entire character and that line.
I can do Southern Meadows if need be.
Oh, thank you, Carlos.
The other Meadows have the Bible.
What do you guys want to watch?
Then our did a marine and then our places.
Let the record reflect I could have filled in for Southern Meadows easily.
So I answered the bank statement, and Carlos didn't object to anything.
I would not have used the word black at any point in time.
That was fun.
White is made. But now white is a lot less fish than black. You know, considered history or whatnot. God, why don't I do that? I freaking love it. Like,
Okay,
oh,
but
okay, but why
And I consider before I saw like I feel like there's like philosophically it's like people just like that you like describing your own expert. Like that's what I do.
Like, I
Like I like being able to make the argument, like especially when making it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But then you're going to do that. So, I called Keith Liberty and we came back and actually, for reception now.
You told,
But they can't answer because it's on Liberty. So let's message, and I called him before he back, you know.
Oh, he's there?
No. But like I looked at his clothing, and it's just like not like it's just like non-existent. So he told Richards that like throughout the year he would make 2 minutes.
Oh, I'm not. So I mean, you're gonna go.
That's good.
No, like, I'm not gonna pay for that. Don't worry. No, I was gonna say, I called your company 25 times. I called the legal board. Daily, was not my fault. It says the order's something for 2. I don't know how to get it.
Yeah.
I put in my information in the I ordered everything on my phone, like, don't you not use it? I mean, like I said, phones not alter what should have been.
Oh, you have to pay class? Are you not gonna get through that?
I will not be paying $2 with my own phone. That's something I'm gonna do that with either.
It was
I need to see how much expensive that shit
You?
Yeah, that would be good. That would be
You wanna dance? Let me finish this first. I hate you. Monique, what you guys are cross using?
Yes.
Are you using the, you don't have it? Doesn't one team have it? The Elements of Drive? Rivalry?
No,
Yeah.
there is a team that has it.
Yeah,
It is
my
the
truck.
Peters team.
You have it?
And would you like some
You have it, you have it here.
Yeah, I
right?
have it here. Right. You just have to go get it. Yeah, I'll get it direct next week.
No, thank you.
Can I write some potatoes?
You really busted it up? I have no idea what happened to lunch or anything.
We got something down.
Can you choose? I did not notice that. I've used it.
They're sitting in a chair, like, you'll get used to that chair, that's what it was.
Well, not as bad because that person's like actually disabled. Like,
Is this girl late?
When I'm actually an adult and actually wear suits every day, I'll run a clock. You know what's the title of the time now?
Oh, yeah. No, I'll go off now.
I don't like this.
Oh, you haven't seen it with the actual outfit. This is just and this isn't even the correct.
I can barely tell because your suit is like you're not wide enough, you're not broad enough.
No, it's, well, one, this isn't the right size. I was just having trouble placing it. This isn't the right suit that goes along with it. Two, I really only wear these for when I'm not wearing the suit, too. Like, you should have seen me did one doing. I had the red,
Yeah,
black tie.
yeah, I wouldn't
You're not kidding, it's closing.
Well, how did you split the fence or that's fine.
So right now,
I'm playing with that right now.
Billy, it's you.
What?
Is that the case?
No, right now,
I know I'm a slide usually, but right now, I'm just back to right now playing with this. And then I'm going back upstairs and I'm doing cross, Hoy, and then across someone, and close for Peterson.
And you
So I
was
just came
that
with
before
Peterson.
or
So you're
after?
filling in for Bree right now downstairs.
Interesting, so I just directed.
Who's filling for
Richard, do you actually?
Were you aware of
remember?
the issues before?
Yeah,
or after? Okay. I didn't go on. That's better.
I was just gonna do that. I think.
It's really like
I'm sure you showed. Yeah.
These are just like art functional, art functioning.
So like,
Too dangerous.
Wasn't it too dangerous or was the right
No,
amount?
it's very high quality material. This is gorgeous.
so I entered the statement in my car.
Again, with who? No, like who are you entering from? Keenan? I mean, how, what do you guys reject? They would stop all
Yeah, you can argue.
But,
Oh, of course you
get
can
off
argue
what?
anything, yeah.
And then, so.
I know, but like I get off work.
I got something in.
But like I'm gonna not have to until like 7:30 in the morning, so then I'll have to like figure out how to.
Bring food with you? I know, that's a lunch.
Well, of course, but like getting attorney at the same
Should we
time, like
object
not.
anyone when you go across statements first, or you just gonna?
We'll call it Ladero.
What the?
Who's the kind of thing we're gonna do?
They all go Christians, yeah.
I can, but like, you know,
You actually came dressed. Yesterday, dude. Good. 2 weeks.
I'm always. A little bit. No, thanks to your generation has changed. I don't know. Lawyers are like talking about. Really? Really?
She has
you know, maybe in your boss.
Wait, actually.
guys can be seated.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Let's call the final state's witness.
At this time, the prosecution calls Tracy Meadows to the stand.
All right, Mr. Meadows, stand here to my right. Mr. Howden, you can start. That is my right.
Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good evening. My name is Tracy Menendez.
What do you do for a living, Mr. Meadows?
Currently, I'm kind of in between jobs right now. Kind of going through things with my wife, so I don't really have time to have a job.
How are you involved in today's case, Mr. Meadows?
I was sent something in the mail called a subpoena, so I have to be here now.
Are you here today to testify?
Yeah, I'm here today to testify against Mr. Bancroft.
And for the record, could you identify Mr. Bancroft by an article of clothing?
Mr. Bancroft is the young man with the hair in the white shirt.
Your Honor, please let the record reflect that Mr. Meadows has properly identified the defendant, Mr. Bancroft.
Mr. Hepding, the description of having hair in a picture applies to the males of the corner. So, just for the sake and the sanctity of the record, I'm going to have to ask you to get a more specific description out of the witness, just so that we're sure here.
Mr. Meadows, would you mind re-identifying Mr. Bancroft?
I'm sorry. He's the man. He's got the checkered tie. So with the hair, it's shaved right here. Next to the, he's all the way at the end of the right of the table.
Your Honor, please let the record reflect that Mr. Meadows has once again properly identified the defendant.
The record shall so reflect.
Now, Mr. Meadows, do you know Mr. Bancroft personally?
Not really. I see Mr. Bancroft on the television sometimes. Chase did have him over for drinks one night, and so, you know, I hung out with him that one time.
When did this meeting occur?
This meeting took place just before Thanksgiving of 2014.
Was there a man named Mickey Keenan at this meeting?
I don't know anybody named Mickey Keenan. He certainly wasn't there that night.
Was there a man named Corey Hyde at this meeting?
I don't know Corey Hyde either. No Corey Hyde was there that night. Just me, my sister, and Mr. Bancroft.
What time did Mr. Bancroft arrive?
Mr. Bancroft arrived pretty late, around 10:30. A little weird. We don't have people over that late.
Do you remember what was discussed during this meeting?
They kept talking about a casino proposal, a lot of businessy stuff that I wasn't too familiar with. But I did hear Mr. Bancroft say he was willing to go the extra mile. I don't know if he was talking about NASCAR or the business proposal. I don't really know.
Did you ever at any point see Mr. Bancroft or Miss Covington on their cell phones?
Definitely not. Mama raised me and Chase right. She knows not to be on her phone during dinner or hanging out with people. I never saw Mr. Bancroft on his phone at all either. I don't even know if he had a phone.
And to your knowledge, Mr. Meadows, was there any communication with anyone outside of this meeting besides yourself, Mr. Bancroft, and Miss Covington?
No, they never left that night. No one came over that night. No one was talking on any cellular phones or anything. It was just us three. Mainly it was them two talking about business and whatnot, but only us talking.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Hepling. Is there a cross-examination for the witness?
Yes.
Ms. Garces, you can begin on your right.
Good evening, Mr. Meadows.
Good evening, lady.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Mr. Bancroft was over at your house.
Yeah, Mr. Bancroft was over at my house, Chase's house, I guess, for drinks.
Now, you remember this meeting happening because you were trying to make a good first impression of Mr. Bancroft, correct?
I never met Mr. Bancroft, and I know he's a big business owner. I didn't want to be rude to him. Mama taught me better than that.
Right, but that was the first impression, correct?
That was the first time I ever met him.
Right. However, you don't remember much of the conversation because in your own words, their talk of business was incomprehensible to you.
I don't own a casino or anything. They were talking about square footage, this gambling game, that gambling game. I don't gamble. I don't know the difference between poker or roulette or whatnot, so I didn't know what they were talking about when they said those words.
Right, but I did take note of one phrase that you said, and I wanted to make sure that I got this correct.
Okay.
You stated that Mr. Bancroft said he was willing to go the extra mile beyond the proposal.
Yeah, he was willing to go the extra mile.
Did you ever ask Mr. Bancroft to clarify what he meant by that?
I didn't really talk much to Mr. Bancroft. I just kept giving him PBRs all night.
Right, so you didn't know if they were talking about extra conference space.
I don't know what they were talking about.
Right, and you don't know if they were talking about donations.
I don't know what they were talking about.
Right. The only thing that you do know is that during this whole time, nobody mentioned the word bribe.
I didn't hear the word bribe, but if it was me bribing someone, I'm keeping that on the down low. I'm not saying bribe.
Right, but redirecting you back to my question, nobody said the word bribe this whole time.
My brother's too secret for that.
Right, and you stated earlier that you didn't have a job, but in fact, you do work for Miss Covington.
I say that I work for my sister, kind of her assistant. I get her laundry, I clean the house, get her groceries, stuff like that.
Right, but for clarification, you do not work at Miss Covington's office.
No, I don't work at her office.
You don't keep track of any of her work documents?
Objection, relevance.
Response?
Your Honor, the relevance to this line of questioning will become apparent after a few questions, but at this point in time, this is going to the witness's credibility. Mr. Menetos is testifying on a meeting that he saw, and through my line of questioning, the court will see that Mr. Menetos does not have any other meeting to reference this to, and therefore, everything that he heard, he can't put any context to it.
Response?
Well, I see where counsel is wanting to go with this. I don't see how Mr. Menetos' employment has anything to do with him partaking in another meeting.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
This is relevant because Mr. Menetos works for Ms. Covington. However, that is not at her office. So Mr. Menetos does not follow Ms. Covington to any meetings, or Mr. Bancroft for that matter. And that will become apparent with the line of questioning. Therefore, he has no idea what this meeting was actually about.
I agree. I think this is relevant to show his ability to perceive the meeting that was discussed both on direct and cross-examination at this point. So the objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
One more time, Mr. Menetos. You do not keep track of any of your sister's financial or work documents.
Objection asked and answered.
I think it's for clarification, so overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Menetos, was that a yes to my question?
I'm sorry, everyone keeps talking. Can you repeat the
No
question?
problem. One more time. You do not keep track of your sister's financial or work documents.
No. My sister is the owner of Black Bear Casino. She has other people do that for her.
Is it your testimony that your sister owns the Black Bear Casino?
My sister is one of the commission people, so she has people handle her financial records for her.
All right, Mr. Menetos, now back to my questions. You also do not keep track of who Miss Covington is or what she does all the time, because you stay at home, correct?
My sister's old enough to do whatever she wants. I don't want to know what she does in her personal life. A little weird. I only worry about myself.
Right, and as for Mr. Bancroft, you also do not keep track of who he meets with or when he has meetings.
I only met him one time. I don't know much about him.
That's right, that's right. So when you testified earlier today about a certain meeting at your home, you do not have any other meetings to reference that to, correct?
I only met with him the one time.
Right, and one last time. During that whole meeting, neither Miss Covington, nor Mr. Bancroft, nor you for that matter, mentioned the word bribe.
No, we never mentioned the word bribe. I mean, as I said, why would you say bribe if you're going to bribe someone? I could have told on him right there.
Your Honor, at this time I have no further questions.
All right. Is there any redirect examination for the witness?
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
For the record, Mr. Menendez, when did the commission announce that they would be issuing a casino license?
I heard on the news it was about October 1st of last year, 2014.
October 1st, 2014. And when did this meeting with Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Covington take place?
It was right before Thanksgiving, so maybe a month before that, after that.
So a month afterwards, and this was the only meeting that you attended between your stepsister and Mr. Bancroft?
Yeah, my sister started to get very discreet after that, so I wasn't invited to any more meetings that she would have.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hefner. Is there a recross examination?
Not at this time, Your Honor.
Your excuse, Mr. Menendez?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your esteemed honor. Your distinct honor.
Are there any witnesses further for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Avery Bancroft.
Mr. Bancroft, the witness stands here to my right. Remember, you have been sworn.
Yes, Your Honor.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to us?
Hi, I'm Avery Bancroft.
Mr. Bancroft, where are you from?
I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Florida, but I live here in Midlands now.
What do you do for a living now that you're here in Midlands?
I'm the owner of the Black Bear Casino.
How exactly did you get started into the casino business?
Well, my father owned the casino way back when, so I started from the bottom up, working at the front desk, different things, and then I became vice president of the casino and all of the things that happened there. But then once my father passed away, I started owning the casino and started running the casino's operations.
And how many casinos do you own here today?
Currently only one, although I tried entering another proposal for the second casino.
How exactly did you go about looking to build a new casino?
Well, I entered a proposal to the Midlands Gambling Commission, and I thought it was a great proposal. Then I started clearing some land, hoping that my fantastic proposal would end up being voted on.
How confident were you in your proposal's ability to be accepted by the MGC, the Midlands Gambling Commission?
Well, at the time I was very confident. My proposal would have brought $1.7 million to charities across Midlands, 250 jobs to the people of Midlands. There was just so many good things that my proposal would bring. But then I lost confidence in my proposal.
Mr. Bancroft, why exactly did you start to lose confidence in your proposal?
I started losing confidence in my proposal right after I met with Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde.
Who is Mickey Keenan?
He was Chase Covington's auditor, so I thought he was Chase Covington's right-hand man.
And when did this meeting take place between you, Mickey Keenan, and Corey Hyde?
On March 31st.
Okay, so when this meeting took place, can you tell us what was discussed?
Well, I wanted to see what Mr. Mickey Keenan thought about my proposal. I thought I had some great ideas, and since he was Chase Covington's right-hand man, he had a lot of influence on Chase Covington's decision. But then the conversation took a turn for the worst.
What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, Mr. Mickey Keenan started saying that I needed to sweeten the pot, as well as Corey Hyde. and they said that I needed to make Chase Covington happy.
Mr. Bancroft, how did you react when you heard that from Mickey Keenan?
Well, I didn't know what to think. My proposal was great, so then I asked for another meeting with Chase Covington there. That way I could know what Chase Covington thought about my ideas.
Okay, and in this next meeting, who was here?
It was Chase Covington, myself, Corey Hyde, and Mickey Keenan. I also had my head of security, Danny Hoy, stand outside, so that way Shannon Stark, the other person who entered the proposal, wouldn't get any of the ideas, since I thought my proposal was so great.
Okay, so in this meeting, what exactly did you and Chase Covington talk about?
Well, we started discussing my proposal. Me and Chase Covington discussed square footage, music that would make guests happy, the amount of slot machines we should have, really everything about my proposal.
Did anything else happen in this conversation when you were trying to convince Chase Covington of your proposal?
Well, Mr. Mickey Keenan started again by saying I needed to make Chase Covington happy.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Thoughts?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, hearsay is an out-of-court statement offered for the truth of the matter asserted. This statement, we're not offering it for its truth value. We're only offering it for the effect it had on the listener. In this case, the listener being Avery Bancroft, and the effect that it had on Avery Bancroft. And if I may proffer to the court,
You may.
the effect that it would have on Avery Bancroft would be the actual reaction that Avery Bancroft took and the way in which Avery Bancroft understood that information from Mickey Keenan and reacted to it as such.
Could you, so you just proffered that Mr. Bancroft will react. Can you proffer the manner in which he will react?
He will, yes, Your Honor, I apologize. He will hesitate, he will stutter, and he won't be sure exactly how to react. However, at this moment, he'll say that he learned this is when the bride, he will learn that this is the moment in which Mickey Keenan wants Avery Bancroft to bride.
Response, Ms. Oliver?
Your Honor, this is going to demonstrate some sort of effect today here in court, meaning that effect has to come onto the record. Your Honor, that effect, as it is speculation. That's what Mickey Keenan wanted, what sort of thought Mickey Keenan wanted. The effect on the listener must be admissible today here in court, and that effect is textbook speculation.
May I be heard on that, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, the question doesn't ask for Mickey Keenan's mindset from Avery Bancroft. It asks what Avery Bancroft himself thinks Mickey Keenan wants him to do. It's only asking for this witness's mindset. It doesn't matter what Mickey Keenan actually thought.
Your Honor.
And we're not perceiving the jury to have that understanding of what Mickey Keenan thought, simply what Avery Bancroft felt. That's all that's important in this trial.
Response, Ms. Oliver?
Your Honor, if I may, that's exactly what speculation is. It's the witness on the stand speculating as to what another witness wanted them to do, what another witness was thinking, what was happening inside that person's mind. It's exactly what the counselor is going to ask Mr. Bancroft to do, therefore that is speculation.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
One last time, yes.
Your Honor, speculation only is only an issue in the court of law when the witness at hand attempts to dive into the mindset of another individual and bring forth that information as though it's to be true. In this case, Your Honor, we're only asking this witness what he felt was the case that he needed to bribe Chase Covington at that meeting. Not that what Mickey Keenan actually thought or what Mickey Keenan actually felt at the time. Just what Avery Bancroft felt after receiving this information, how to act, how to react. And that is the effect we're using it in trial today.
I think given that proffer, despite the fact that it is Mickey Keenan's statement, which might be accompanied by some number of intentions, ultimately that proffer is limited to the impression left on Mr. Bancroft.
Your Honor,
given that issue out of the way, do you have a response?
Your Honor, may I ask for a limited instruction then to that effect that this statement not be taken as Mr. Officer Keenan's intention, specifically this witness's perception of them today here in court?
That limiting instruction is granted. I have one question. Could someone repeat the statement for me, Mr. Shibata? I know it's been a little long. The statement that the witness was about to elicit?
Yes.
The reaction. The question I asked the witness was, what was his reaction? The statement, I believe, was Avery Bancroft needs to pitch more than just ideas to Chase Covington.
Ultimately, I don't think that statement can be true or false, and it doesn't alter the proceedings of the rest of the argumentation regardless. And given all of that, given the argumentation on both sides, the objection is overruled with the limiting instruction that the jury take the statement only for the effect it had on Mr. Bancroft, that to no degree represents Mr. Keenan's intent at the time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mr. Bancroft, after Mickey Keenan told you that you needed to do more than just ideas to Chase Covington, how did you take that information?
Well, I didn't know what to do. I stopped, hesitated. I honestly didn't know what to say, but that was the moment when I realized that Mr. McKean wanted me to bribe Chase Covington.
Objection or speculation?
I think that the nature of that answer too heavily focuses on Mickey Keenan's mindset. Instruction to the jury or not, it's too easy for the jury to misunderstand. So I'm going to sustain the objection and strike the testimony. There's a proper way to phrase it, but that's not it.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, would you like me to instruct the witness to answer accordingly, or would you like to instruct the witness to avoid any mindset?
Mr. Bancroft, keep your answer limited to the effect it had on you as to whether you felt at this point you needed or did not need to bribe Chase Covington, but separate out Mickey Keenan's intention at the moment from your answer as possible.
Yes, Your Honor.
You continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bancroft, after Mickey Keenan told you that information, that you needed to pitch more than just ideas, how did you, what exactly did you think Mickey Keenan wanted you to do?
Well, I personally thought that Mr. Mickey Keenan wanted me to bribe Chase Covington.
So, after you heard that from Mickey Keenan, after you felt that, what exactly did Mickey Keenan do at that meeting?
He slid me a napkin and a pen, and he said absolutely nothing. So, given the awkwardness of the meeting, I just wiped my face with the napkin, figuring that he saw that I was sweating.
After you wiped your face with the napkin, what did Mickey Keenan do next?
He passed me another napkin and another pen, and I was so confused because he just did that earlier. But then he said, "It's always about the money." So then I wrote a number on the napkin.
Mr. Bancroft, did you give that napkin to Chase Covington?
Yes, I did. I slid it across the table, and Chase Covington said, "I think I'm going to need some more reasons." So then he slid it back, I crossed out the number, and I wrote a higher number.
Did Chase Covington accept the napkin?
Chase Covington put the napkin in his pocket. I couldn't believe that I did that.
Mr. Bancroft, why exactly did you ultimately decide to bribe Chase Covington?
I thought I had no choice. Going into this, I thought my proposal was fantastic. I thought it was a great proposal. But after the meetings with Mr. Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde, my assistant, they convinced me that my proposal wasn't enough, and I needed to do more.
Mr. Bancroft, why exactly did you feel that you needed to do more for this project?
Because Mr. Mickey Keenan kept telling me, "You need to do more to sweeten the pot. You need to make Chase Covington happy. You need to go the extra mile." I just had no other choice. And because Mr. Mickey Keenan was Chase Covington's right-hand man, I thought he had a great influence on Chase Covington's decision.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Is there a cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Mr. Bancroft, I want to go through 3 meetings that you had. 3 meetings where Officer Keenan wasn't in attendance. Starting with the meeting that you had back in Thanksgiving of 2014. Remember that meeting?
Yes, I do. I went over to Chase Covington's house.
You went to Chase Covington's house to discuss your proposal.
Yes. It was really a preliminary meeting, just discussing kind of what Chase Covington was looking for. He just gave me some basic ideas to start my proposal.
Let's go through exactly what we talked about at this meeting. You talked about going the extra mile.
Oh, why yes, of course. I knew Chase Covington was a person who really enjoyed charity, so I decided right then and there that I would donate $1.7 million annually from my own pocket to charities.
You also talked about making history by being the only person in Midlands to own 2 casinos.
Yes. Since this casino was my vision, I think I would make at least my own personal history, at least my personal historic scrapbook, by getting a second casino.
Mr. Bancroft, when you're having this meeting about making history and going the extra mile, this wasn't happening at Chase Covington's office.
No. Chase Covington said that normally the preliminary meetings happens at the Midlands Gambling Commission, the chair's house, or at least someone who's on the Midlands Gambling Commission's house.
So it didn't happen at your house?
No, like I just said, it normally happens at the Midlands Gambling Commission's person's house.
At 11 o'clock at night?
I believe I arrived around 10:15 or 10:30. It was right after I got out after the busy day at the Black Bear, so that was the only time I could meet with Chase Covington.
This meeting, this business meeting as you called it, took place over alcoholic drinks.
Yes. Normally I like to have a margarita with my business meetings. It kind of loosens the mood a little bit.
Now, Mr. Bancroft, when you were meeting with the head of the commission at 11 o'clock at his house over alcoholic drinks, you hadn't even met Officer Keenan.
No, I didn't. That was a preliminary meeting. We only discussed aspects of the proposal of what Miss Covington was looking for in my proposal.
Corey Hyde wasn't acting at Mickey Keenan's informant at that point?
I don't believe so. In court today, Corey Hyde said it was in February when she started acting as Corey Hyde's informant.
At this point, you didn't even know what Officer Keenan looked like.
No, I didn't. But at the meeting, we only discussed aspects of the proposal.
Okay. Let's go on to the next time. There came a time when Corey Hyde saw you putting $200,000 into a briefcase.
Yes, she did.
Now, this was right before a meeting that you had with Chase Covington,
Yes, it was.
the woman you later went on to bribe.
Yes, because of Mr.
Now, when you were putting $200,000 into that briefcase, Mickey Keenan wasn't there.
No, we were meeting with Mr. Mickey Keenan afterwards when the bribe was supposed to take place.
You weren't on the phone with Mickey Keenan?
No, like I just said, we were supposed to meet Mr. Keenan at the room 3 hall.
It was just you, Corey Hyde, and that briefcase full of $200,000 in that room when you were filling the briefcase with the bribe money.
Yes, it was.
Finally, the VIP room. Now, you exchanged your bribe in the VIP room of your casino.
Yes, I did.
Now, when you did this, you went to a poker table.
I believe it was a blackjack table, and Mr. Allie Thomas, one of the good dealers there, was dealing for us.
So you're playing blackjack then.
Yes, we were.
You sat down at this table
Yes, we did.
with your briefcase full of $200,000.
Yes. I can't believe that I actually went through with it. I never would have done this.
And when it was time to leave, you gave Chase Covington your briefcase,
Yes.
the one that was filled with the money.
Yes, because Mr. Mickey Keenan said that I needed to make Chase Covington happy.
But Mr. Bancroft, when you handed a bribe to a politician, Officer Keenan wasn't in that room.
No, he wasn't. But he's the person that started influencing me to do this. He gave me the idea.
Corey Hyde wasn't in that room.
No, she wasn't.
But it was just you, Chase Covington, and that briefcase full of $200,000.
Yes, ma'am, that's true. But without Mr. Mickey Keenan giving me the idea of bribing Chase Covington, I wouldn't have ever done it.
No, you're telling us you needed him to commit this crime.
I needed him to come up with the idea of it. I would never have decided to bribe Chase Covington without Mickey Keenan.
I know that's what you're telling this jury here today in court, but you were sitting here when Ms. Hyde took the stand.
Yes, I was.
You heard her tell this jury that you said, we don't need the auditor for this.
Yes,
The auditor is Mickey Keenan.
he is. I guess I was just so angry at myself for committing this bribe I couldn't believe that I was doing it.
Let's talk about what you said in an email. Now approaching opposing counsel at Exhibit 26. Now approaching opposing witness with the stand. And Mr. Bancroft, what I just handed you is a copy of 2 emails.
I only see one correspondence between me and Ms. Covington.
So one of them is an email from you to Ms. Covington.
Yes, one of them is.
The other one is an email from Ms. Covington to you.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I thought you were just talking about 2 separate emails, not one correspondence.
Now, this is a fair and accurate copy of that correspondence.
Yes, it is.
Has not been changed or altered in any way.
No, it hasn't.
This was sent on April 15th.
Yes, April 15th at 1:16 and 1:18 p.m.
All right, now moving to evidence, which will pre-marked as Exhibit 26.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Shall we move the evidence? States to.
Now, this top email is one that you sent to Chase Covington,
Yes,
the woman that you later went on to give a bribe to.
that's true.
Now, in this email you say, I will tell Cora that Noon works for you.
Yes, that's what I said.
Then you go on to tell Chase Covington. But do we really need Keenan for this?
Yes, I did say that.
I read that correctly.
You did.
No further questions, Your Honor. Permission to approach and retrieve and publish to the jury.
You may. Is there any redirect examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Proceed.
May I approach the copy that was tendered to the bench? Excuse me, the jury.
You may.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
May I proceed?
You may.
Mr. Bancroft, Ms. Alloa just stood up here and asked you to read that last portion of what you wrote to Chase Covington in this email. Now, I want to ask you, why exactly did you write, but do we really need Keenan for this?
Well, since Mr. McKinnon wanted me to bribe, I didn't want him in the meeting because he made me uncomfortable, and since it was Chase Covington's vote, I thought maybe that he wouldn't have to come to the meeting.
No further questions, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
Is there any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Bancroft, you are. Are there any further witnesses for the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Alan Thomas to the stand.
All right, Mr. Thomas. Remember you have been sworn. Let's stand straight by right.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, do I have permission to set up the demonstrative?
You may.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Good evening. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good evening. My name is Ali Thomas.
Where are you from, Mr. Thomas?
I was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada. You know, the Sin City.
Where are you currently living?
Currently residing here in Midland City, Midlands.
What brought you all the way from Las Vegas here to Midland?
Well, I wanted to get away from all the hustle and bustle that was going on in Sin City. I like the city, not so much the sin. So when I turned 21, I decided to find a different location.
And what do you do for a living here in Midland?
I'm currently a professional dealer at the Blackberry Casino. It's something I was infatuated as a child, and when I got older, I decided I wanted to make a genuine career out of it. I guess, coming from Vegas, I guess you could say it's in the blood.
And how long have you been a casino dealer at the Black Bear?
I'd say going on maybe 7 years, but I've been dealing for 14. 2 of those years were actually learning how to pick up the tricks and understanding how to play cards.
What kind of card games do you deal at this casino?
Well, I deal anything that the customers fancy, and that's Texas Omaha, blackjack, poker, anything they can name, I'll deal for them.
Mr. Thomas, have you worked at any other casinos before?
Yes, I have. I've worked at a few at my hometown location.
And how did it go working at those casinos?
Well, I liked working for them, but they just had too many sketchy things going on. So after 5 years, I decided to quit.
Why did you quit working at those casinos?
So like I said earlier, they just had too many sketchy things going on, and I didn't like the background images that they were giving off. So I decided I wanted to find a more legal casino. So I did some research, and I stumbled upon the Blackberry Casino.
Mr. Thomas, what about the Blackberry Casino made you believe that it was legitimate?
Well, unlike other casinos that I've worked for, this one was the actual first casino that I had to fill out an application. And like I said, I did some research, and I also found out that the owner had all the legal permits, and anything that she paid to the employees, she reported it to the IRS.
And who owns the Blackberry Casino?
Mr. Avery Bancroft.
Now, when you first began working for Mr. Bancroft, which area of the casino were you assigned?
Well, just like any new dealer, I was assigned in the blackjack table, the lobby of the casino, so that way I can learn all the rules and regulations, and because the cameras were always watching, so I can get used to them.
Mr. Thomas, what do you mean the cameras were always watching?
Well, Mr. Bancroft was a cautious person. He wanted to make sure that nobody was doing anything bad, and he made sure that we were using hand command signs, and just so that nobody was doing anything funny, and that I was doing my job correctly. It's because I learned all the rules and regulations that I became the main dealer in the VIP room.
Now, Mr. Thomas, I'd like to talk to you about April 16, 2015. Do you remember that day?
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
No problem.
And, Mr. Thomas, if I showed you a picture of a diagram of the VIP room, would you be able to recognize it?
Yes, I will.
Your Honor, may I approach Mr. Thomas and opposing counsel?
You may.
Mr. Thomas, can you identify this document?
Yes, it's a layout of the VIP room.
Is this the same VIP room that you personally deal at?
Yes, it is.
Does it look changed or altered in any way?
No, it doesn't.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense enters Exhibit 4 as Defense B.
Any objection?
Oh, yes, Your Honor, to lack of foundation as to the witness's knowledge of the camera angles that are featured in this document.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Mr. Thomas will not be testifying today about any camera angles, simply what is on the picture so that the members of the jury can follow along to his testimony.
Would you be comfortable, Mr. Hebding, if we constructively redacted the cameras and the angles, including any blind spots that might appear because of them?
Oh, yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Would you be okay with that as well, Ms. Garces?
Yes.
Okay, we'll constructively redact those, and the document shall be entered as State's 2, or rather, Defense 2.
Now, Your Honor, I actually have a blown-up version of this same exhibit for the members of the jury to follow along.
Any objection to that, Mr. Hebding?
Can she repeat that?
To an enlarged version of the same document.
No objection.
All right. Ms. Garces, you're free to use it and show it to the jury, and Mr. Thomas, you're free to step down.
Mr. Thomas, I'd like to set the scene for the members of the jury. Is this the same diagram that was just shown to you?
Yes, it is. Just much bigger, though.
And this is the VIP room that you work at?
Yes, it is.
Now, on April 16, you mentioned that you were working in the VIP room. Can you point to us which table you were working at?
It's working over here in the center blackjack table in front of this funny-looking thing, which is the water fountain we have in the VIP room.
And can you describe to the members of the jury, just for clarification, what are the other objects on here?
Yes, like I said earlier, these two over here are the center blackjack table. The ones on the sides are used for the poker. This one over here is for roulette, and this one is for craps. And like I said earlier, this funny thing, it's actually the water fountain we have in the VIP room.
One more time to the jury. Can you point to which one you were working on April 16th?
Yes, the one right over here.
And did you ever see Mr. Bancroft at all that day?
Yes, he did. He came from the side doors next to the water fountain, sat at the center blackjack table, and I got him ready to play.
Was Mr. Bancroft alone?
Well, at first he was, but then he was later accompanied by Chase Covington, who also came from the side of the doors and sat at the center blackjack table.
Can you explain to the members of the jury who Chase Covington is?
Yes. Well, Chase Covington is a known face around the casino. She comes a lot to play.
Then what were Mr. Bancroft and Miss Covington doing?
Well, they were playing blackjack for a few minutes. They were talking about the layout of the conference room, the penny slots, the quarter slots, and songs more suitable for the customers.
And what happened after Mr. Bancroft and Miss Covington played a simple game of blackjack?
After some time, Chase Covington picked up the briefcase and left. He was later accompanied by one of the regulars at the casino. Mr. Bancroft just sat there, was playing blackjack for a few minutes, and talked some jokes here and there.
Now, Mr. Thomas, was the VIP room full of people on April 16th?
No. For that particular day, it was just a few regulars, maybe 3 or 4 here in the roulette table, maybe 2 or 3 here. Not so much. It was really peace and calm. That was until Mickey Keenan came storming from the side of the door, yelling with a furious expression on his face.
Mr. Thomas, you can retake your seat.
Yes.
Now, what about Mickey Keenan's demeanor made you believe that he was furious?
Well, I've been dealing blackjack for a long time, so anytime a player loses hands, I know when they're upset with me, when they're getting angry, or when they're furious. And that was the same expression that Mickey Keenan had when he was approaching Mr. Bancroft, came in yelling, slammed on the table, and everybody around was just looking at us.
And what did Mickey Keenan yell to Mr. Bancroft?
He yelled, "Did you find Chase?"
Your Honor, at this time I have no further questions for Mr. Thomas. Would opposing counsel like me to leave this up?
Leave it up, please.
All right, Mr. Hadley, you're free to cross-examine.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good evening, Mr. Thomas. You're here today testifying for the defense,
Yes.
specifically in defense of your boss, Avery Bancroft.
Yes.
And at the Black Bear Casino and Hotel, you're currently employed.
Just at the casino, not the hotel.
And at the casino, you're employed as a dealer.
Yes, I am, as the blackjack table deal.
And would you say it's a privilege to work in the VIP room due to the clientele and the tips you receive?
Well, I consider it somewhat...
Objection, Your Honor, relevance?
Response?
Your Honor, we're simply establishing the bias and credibility of this witness. If this witness is being paid by the defendant in today's case, he may be biased with his testimony here today.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may, briefly.
I fail to see where the paycheck of Mr. Thomas has any relevance to whether Mickey Keenan entrapped or Mr. Bancroft himself was predisposed in today's trial.
I disagree. Ultimately, if it affects the credibility of his testimony, he's allowed to delve into it, so the objection will move.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Mr. Hoy, would you say it's a privilege to work in the VIP room as a dealer due to the clientele and the tips you receive?
Oh, it's Mr. Thomas, first of all, sorry.
I apologize.
And also, I would consider it somewhat of a privilege. I mean, I do work there at times, and sometimes I get big pays, but then again, it's not always an occurrence that I actually get that.
But you generally expect to have the 3.5% on every hand that's played.
Yes, but not all the time do I get that. Like I said, I mean, we do get high rollers in the VIP room, but it's not always like that.
Now, you do receive some form of monetary compensation working as a dealer at the blackjack or at the casino at the Black Bear, other than the tips you receive?
Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Thomas already testified that he gets paid by Mr. Bancroft.
I'll give him a little bit of leeway. Overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, yes. So, Mr. Thomas, you receive some form of monetary compensation other than the tips you receive from the clientele that you deal to?
Yes, that is correct.
And this monetary compensation comes from none other than the defendant in today's case, Mr. Avery Bancroft.
Yes, that is true, but I never really see his face. This give me the paycheck.
But you did see his face on April 16th.
That is correct.
And you were working that day.
Yes, I was working in the VIP room that day.
Your Honor, may the witness step down to make use of this visual aid?
Sure.
Now, Mr. Thomas, it's 2 p.m. in the Black Bear Casino in the VIP room. Where are we?
Over here in the center of the blackjack table.
So you're right here dealing blackjack?
Yes.
To the patrons at this table?
Yes, sir.
And that patron at 2 p.m. was none other than the defendant in today's case, Avery Bancroft?
Yes, that is correct, sir.
And when Mr. Bancroft came and sat at your table, he's carrying a briefcase.
Yes, he was.
Now, shortly thereafter, Mr. Bancroft sits down, is playing a few hands of blackjack with you. Miss Covington walks in.
Yes, like I said, she also came from the side of the door and sat at the center table.
And where did she sit in relation to Mr. Bancroft?
Right over here.
Now, when Miss Covington walked in, she was carrying a similar looking briefcase?
Had some similar aspects, but yes, she was carrying a briefcase.
Now, about 20 minutes of chitter chatter passes by at this point before one of your regulars, Casey Kelly, walks in?
Yes.
And she comes over and sits down?
Yeah, she also sits down and takes the place of Chase Covington.
And at this point, Mr. Bancroft looks over at Chase Covington and says, well, shall we go through with this?
I don't think that's the exact word. He said, shall we do this?
Shall we do this?
Yes.
But Mr. Bancroft, that's what you heard him say?
Yes.
And then Miss Covington, she looks at Mr. Bancroft. She says, I think so.
Yes, that is correct, sir. That's what I heard.
And at this point, she picks up one of these two similar-looking briefcases.
I can't really say as to what she picked up, but she did pick up a briefcase and left.
And she took off from there.
Yes.
And then afterwards, Mickey Keenan comes storming in, all angry and everything, correct?
Yes, that is correct. He came in furious, with a furious expression on his face.
And he comes up right up to Avery Bancroft and he says, did you find Chase?
That is correct.
To which Mr. Bancroft responds, I did, but I couldn't go through with it.
Yes.
And you were confused at this point.
I wouldn't say confused. I didn't really know what was going on between the two. I just knew that this is what they said.
But you weren't confused to any extent after what you heard Mr. Bancroft say to Miss Covington and then having Mickey Keenan stormed in?
Just wondering if they were talking about the same Chase. Other than that, I didn't really know what was going on.
So there was some confusion?
Just a small minor to who they were talking about as to Chase. But other than that, I was paying more attention to the game than I was to their conversation.
Now, Mr. Thomas, you said something interesting on direct. You stated that the cameras were always watching. However, you have no knowledge of these cameras.
No, I don't.
So you just take what word you hear, and that's what's
well, I do know.
Objection, Your Honor. May I?
You may.
Mr. Thomas, we already agreed that Mr. Thomas does not know the camera coverage of this specific exhibit. When Mr. Thomas was testifying, he meant in the general casino, not specifically to the VIP room.
I think that's ultimately going to be up to him to clarify. It's also something you can address on redirect examination.
You repeat the question, sir.
Now, Mr. Thomas, you stated on direct that the cameras were always watching.
Yes, that is correct.
But is your testimony here today that you have no knowledge of what these cameras are watching and what they aren't watching?
Well, I just don't know the angle of where the cameras were looking at exactly, but I do know that there were cameras.
So you know that there were cameras, you just don't know the angles that they covered?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Thomas, you're free to return to your seat. Ms. Garces, is there a redirect examination?
Nope, not at this time, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Thomas, here.
Mr. Thomas, you're right. Permission to...
Deconstruct? Please, feel free. Does the defense have any further witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls Corey Hyde.
Okay. Ms. Hyde, the witness stand is here to my right. Remember, you have been sworn.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Garces, you're free to start when you're ready.
Good evening. Can you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yeah, hi, I'm Corey Hyde.
Where are you from, Ms. Hyde?
I'm originally from Washington State, but then I went to college in Ohio, and I was sick of the cold, so I moved to Vegas. Turns out it's really cold there, too. And now I'm here in Midland City.
What brought you to Midland City?
Well, I was a philosophy major in college, and I needed a job, so I decided to try out gambling, but that wasn't really my thing. While I was there, though, I got a call from the Black Bear Casino in Midland. What really sealed the deal to me, though, was the opportunity to serve as a life coach on the side. My motto is, when nothing goes right, go left.
Mrs. Hyde, you mentioned that you work at the Black Bear Casino. What do you do there?
Yeah, I'm the executive assistant to Mr. Bancroft, the owner of the Black Bear.
What do you do as an executive assistant to the owner of a casino?
I
I do just about everything. I manage his calendar, answer the phone, schedule meetings, everything. I also have a company credit card, which is really cool. But I'm not just his secretary. I help out on the business end too.
What are some of the things that you do on the business end?
For example, last year, we were renovating the conference rooms. So I handled all of the direct contact with the contractors. I mean, all of it. And this year, we were trying to get a proposal for a new casino with the Midlands Gambling Commission. So I worked a lot on that.
When did you first begin working on that proposal?
Yeah, all that started on March 1st, 2015, when I got the call from who I thought was an auditor at the Midlands Gambling Commission, Mickey Keenan. He told me about the proposal and that he wanted Avery Bancroft to submit something.
Objection on hearsay.
Response?
Your Honor, we're not offering the statement of the truth of the matter. We're offering the fact that I had on the listener. Later on, we will continue to discuss what happened with Mickey Keenan by Ms. Hyde.
Response to Sullivan?
Now, if they want to talk about, which I believe is where they're heading with this, the eventual meeting that was set up, they talk about what happened at that meeting and the context of that meeting without going into this hearsay that borders on speculation. Your Honor, may I explain?
You may.
This is a call that was given by an auditor saying that we want Avery Bancroft to set up a meeting. This is being offered, the truth of the matter asserted, that Mickey Keenan wanted Avery Bancroft to submit a proposal.
Your Honor, may I respond to
You
that?
may.
If I may correct Ms. Lowell, the defense was not going into any of those details. We were just plainly going to ask her whether or not she helped out Mickey Keenan, which is why we're here today.
I think ultimately this goes to the witness, in this case Mickey Keenan's plan under 803, so I'm going to allow testimony. The objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Hyde, did you ever meet with Mickey Keenan?
Yeah, the next day, March 2nd, we met to talk about the requirements for the bid and the Blackberry proposal.
And what happened at this meeting?
Well, we were just talking for a bit, and then Mr. Keenan said things in a very different direction.
Can you clarify for the members of the jury what you mean by Mickey Keenan took this in a different direction?
We were only talking for a couple of minutes, then all of a sudden, he slammed the badge on the table. He was actually a cop.
And did you then do anything else for Mickey Keenan?
Well, he started off by accusing me and my boss, Mrs. Bancroft, of committing gambling violations. And I know that I've never done anything wrong.
Objection, Your Honor. Character evidence.
Explain.
Now, if I may, specifically at the beginning of this trial, we constructively filled out a character evidence form in which the defense indicated they would not be offering character evidence of the defendant, Avery Bancroft. The question that was asked was, have you and your boss ever committed gambling violations? And this witness said no, they hadn't.
Your Honor, may I respond to that?
You may.
Once again, if I may correct Ms. Little, I did not ask Ms. Hyde at any point in time whether she or Mr. Bancroft had committed any gambling violations. I simply asked what was going on at the meeting with Mickey Keenan.
I think that wasn't a question. The answer that was elicited testified that neither her nor her boss have committed gambling violations. That is character evidence that the defense specifically said they would not offer. As the prosecution has already committed their case in chief, or committed our case in chief, Your Honor, in this jurisdiction we cannot call rebuttal witnesses. Therefore, this kind of character evidence is improper because we won't have the chance to rebut it.
Ms. Garces, what is the purpose of the witness testifying to her and Ms. Bancroft not committing the gambling violations?
Your Honor, the purpose of this line of questioning is that Ms. Hyde was simply meeting with what she thought was an auditor. Mickey Keenan then turned out to be a cop. And Mickey Keenan, therefore, used supposed gambling violations that she had against her own will so that she could help him, therefore, entrap Mr. Bancroft in today's trial.
So what does that... So all of that factually I understand, but what does that mean for your case? Because there's multiple different purposes and this evidence can be used for, some of which are admissible, some of which are not, and I want to be clear as to how to instruct the jury to take this evidence if I do decide to admit it.
Your Honor, At this time, we're not offering anything that was explicitly said for the truth of the matter, and simply the effect that it had on Ms. Hyde.
I think ultimately this testimony is admissible, so the objection is going to be overruled. The thing at issue here is both the credibility of the witness and whether she actually committed these violations, while obviously does not have an innate effect on her ability to testify truthfully. The amount of duress she was feeling by Mickey Keenan could go to show her motivations. Certainly it goes to cast doubt on the investigation, the procedures used by Mickey Keenan, and for those reasons I believe the testimony is admissible, so the objection is overruled.
Your Honor, if that's the case,
yes.
do we limit the witness's testimony solely as to her committing gambling violations and not the defendant?
We can do so. So we'll issue a limiting instruction that the witness can only testify to her own lack of committing gambling violations, not Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. What happened at this meeting with Mickey Keenan?
Are we still talking about the March 2nd meeting?
Yes, that is correct.
Well, after accusing me of committing gambling violations, I was scared, and I decided that I was going to comply with whatever the police wanted.
Now, did you end up doing anything that Mickey Keenan asked for?
Yeah, I set up meetings between him, me, my boss, Mr. Bancroft, and Mrs. Covington.
Now, you mentioned Ms. Covington. Can you explain who that is?
Yeah, Chase Covington. She's the chair of the Midlands Gambling Commission. She also hangs around the Black Bear a lot, so I see her pretty often.
And when was the first meeting between Mr. Bancroft and Mickey Keenan?
Just the two of them. That was March 31st, 2015.
But why did it take weeks from March 2nd when you met with him to March 31st when Mr. Bancroft met with him?
It took weeks, actually almost the entire month of March, for Mr. Keenan to, I guess, properly prepare me as an informant. It felt like we were spending every second of the day together. And even right before this March 31st meeting, he sent me an email with specific instructions on how to conduct myself at the meeting, and he had me wear a wire, so we had evidence of what was said.
And what actually happened on this March 31st meeting?
Well, at the beginning, it was just my boss, Mr. Bancroft, and Officer Keenan talking to me for a while about the layout and the amenities of the casino.
And did anybody bring up the topic of bribes?
Yes, Officer Keenan did.
And how did Mr. Bancroft respond?
He started fidgeting and wringing his hands. He looked uncomfortable.
And was that the only meeting that you had?
Well, with just the two of them, yeah. But I set up another one for April 13th with Ms. Covington as well.
Right, and what happened at this meeting on April 13th?
Well, it just started off pretty normally with Mr. Bancroft and Ms. Covington just debating about whether they want a concert venue at this new casino. But I saw that Officer Keenan kept on staring at Mr. Bancroft until Mr. Bancroft asked Ms. Covington what he can do for her.
And Ms. Hyde, after that, did anybody bring up the topic of bribes again?
Yes, Officer Keenan did.
Now, was this the last meeting that you set up?
No, I set up another for April 16th.
And Ms. Hyde, who was at the April 16th meeting?
Well, it was supposed to be me, Officer Keenan, Mr. Bancroft, and Ms. Covington, like the April 13th meeting was.
What do you mean, supposed to be?
You see, Ms. Covington never showed up. And I was really nervous that I was going to lose my job. It's my job to set up the meetings and make sure everything is going to go right, but Ms. Covington wasn't even there. And I can't lose my job. Being a life coach in the end doesn't really make ends meet.
How long did you wait for Ms. Covington at this meeting?
I stuck around with Officer Keenan until 1:30, which was an hour and a half after the meeting, which was...
Objection, Your Honor. Number 403 tends to confuse the issues. May I make offer?
You may.
Your Honor, this witness is testifying as to a meeting which Ms. Covington, which the bribe was supposed to take place, and Ms. Covington did not show up. Evidence that the defense is offering to show the cast doubt upon the bribe under State v. Sheik is inadmissible because it tends to confuse the issues under Rule 403, as they have admitted that this bribe took place.
Ms. Garces, what is the purpose of talking about Ms. Covington's not showing up on the April 16th meeting?
Your Honor, the purpose of this is to establish Mickey Keenan's reaction to what was going on and Ms. Covington not showing up to the meeting.
I believe that proffer does have enough probative value to overcome the issues elicited within Sheik. So the objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Hyde, would you like me to restate the question?
Yeah, please.
All right. How long did you wait for Ms. Covington at this meeting?
An hour and a half with Officer Keenan.
And what about Mr. Bancroft?
He ditched at like 12:30, so half an hour, while Officer Keenan was using the restroom. When Officer Keenan came back and saw that Mr. Bancroft had left and that Ms. Covington never showed up, he started yelling and stormed into the room.
Your Honor, at this time I have no further questions for Ms. Hyde.
Understood. Is there a cross-examination from the side?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Hyde, you are still currently employed by Mr. Bancroft.
Yes, I'm still his assistant.
Means you are paid by Mr. Bancroft?
Yes.
And as you told us on direct, you wouldn't be able to be a life coach without pay supplemented to you by working at the Blackberry.
Right, I would have to find another job.
And being a life coach is your passion, as you told us.
Yes.
You're here testifying today in defense of Mr. Bancroft?
Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Overruled. I think it's foundational.
You're here testifying today in defense of Mr. Bancroft?
Yes.
No. I do want to draw your attention to a meeting about security that you attended. This meeting was between yourself, Mr. Bancroft, and the head of security at the Black Center, Danny Hoyne.
Yes.
You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Now, this was a meeting about security. This is a meeting about security for a meeting that would take place between Chase Covington, yourself, and Mr. Bancroft.
Right.
This meeting about security between the defendant and Chase Covington, you were there for that.
Yes.
And at this meeting, Mr. Bancroft made some requests for security.
That's true.
A request for security that you've never seen him make before.
No, I haven't seen that before.
See, the defendant, he asked the head of security to sweep the room before the meeting even started.
Yes.
He asked the head of security to stand outside the door.
Yes.
He asked the head of security to pat everyone down before they ever walked into the room.
Yes.
This was new to you.
Yeah, I've never seen him do this before.
Now, when you arrived at that meeting, the one between the defendant, Chase Covington, and yourself, the head of security was outside the door.
I'm sorry, are you talking about the meeting on the 13th?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Danny Hoyne, the head of security, was outside that door.
Yes.
Just like the defendant had requested.
Right.
And you got patted down.
Yes.
Just like the defendant requested.
Yes.
Everyone who entered that meeting was patted down.
Yes, that's what happened at that meeting.
Now, I want to draw your attention to just a few days later, when you walked into Mr. Bancroft's office and saw him with a briefcase.
Okay.
Now, you remember that?
I do, yeah.
You remember it because you saw the defendant stuffing $200,000 into that briefcase.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Not what you thought it was you saw him putting stacks and stacks of money into a briefcase.
Right, in terms of the amount of money.
Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning seems to be confusing the issues. We've already established that the bribe occurred. The money stuffing does not go to show whether Mr. Bancroft was predisposed in this case.
Why are you entering the sentence hall?
Actually, Your Honor, under what we as a prosecution are pursuing the theory of predisposition, that the defendant was predisposed to commit this crime. One of the elements of predisposition is the level to which the defendant participated in the crime. This is going to show his level of participation. This Attorney Crawford, Your Honor.
You may.
This witness was going to testify that at the time when that was happening, Officer Keenan was nowhere in the room, wasn't on the phone with the defendant, or in communication with the defendant. It goes to rebut their theory of inducement, and goes to present our theory of predisposition.
The objection's overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, you saw the defendant putting $200,000 worth of money into a briefcase.
Yes, I did.
This was just before you guys were supposed to go and meet Chase Covington.
Yes, they were supposed to bribe Ms. Covington.
Now, when you saw the defendant putting this money in the briefcase just before the bribe took place, Officer Keenan wasn't in that room.
I'm sorry, the bribe didn't take place right then.
Before the meeting when the bribe was supposed to take place.
When it was supposed to, yeah, it didn't happen. Right
Okay,
then.
so when you saw the defendant putting that money into a briefcase, just before the bribe was supposed to take place, Officer Keenan wasn't in that room.
No, I didn't see him around yet.
The defendant wasn't on the phone with Officer Keenan.
No, we were supposed to meet with him in 15 minutes.
The defendant wasn't on the phone with anyone.
No, this was 11:45 around, and we were supposed to meet with Officer Keenan at 12, which is when he showed up.
So when you walked into the room, it was just the defendant, the briefcase, and the stacks of cash.
Yeah, preparing for a new meeting.
I want to ask you specifically about a quote at this meeting that took place, the one on April 12th.
April 12th?
Yes.
Oh, that was the meeting with Danny McCoy?
I'm sorry, April 13th, the meeting with Chase Covington.
The one where where Ms. Covington's actually there?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Now, at this meeting, Chase Covington looks at the defendant. Chase Covington said, "I have another good proposal on my desk. I need some good reasons to vote for yours."
Yes.
And in response to that statement, the defendant said, "How about 100,000 reasons?"
Yes, that happened.
Now, Chase Covington didn't say, "I would need some money to vote for yours."
No.
Didn't say, "I would need a bribe to vote for yours."
No, that didn't happen.
Chase Covington said he would need a good reason to vote for the defense casino.
Right.
To which the defendant responded, offering him 100,000 good reasons.
Well, that's what was said while I was in there. I don't know if there were any other implications or something said outside of that meeting.
I'm asking us what the defendant said. That's what you heard Avery Bancroft say.
Yeah, at that particular time, that's what was said.
Thank you, Ms. High. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right. Is there a redirect examination for the witness?
Just a brief one, Your Honor.
Okay.
Ms. Hyde, you were asked a lot of questions about some money that Mr. Bancroft was putting into a briefcase.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yeah, and you don't happen to be with Mickey Keenan all the time, do you?
No, that happened, well, during the month of March, I was always around him while he was prepping me. But in the month of April, it was pretty much only during those meetings, a little bit outside, not too often.
Right, so the only thing that you can testify to today is interactions that you saw between Mickey Keenan and Mr. Bancroft.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Overruled.
Well, of course, I can't say anything I wasn't there to see.
Exactly, so, Ms. Hyde, for all you know, Mickey Keenan could have asked Mr. Bancroft to put that money in the briefcase.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that, but it totally could have happened.
Your Honor, this time I have no further questions.
Is there a recross examination?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ms. Hyde, you can be excused.
Thank you.
Are there any further witnesses for the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests its case in chief. Ask for a small recess if necessary.
Are both sides in request for a recess? I would prefer to keep going only because I think Giancarlo will have a panic attack if I don't see it's closed.
Your Honor, that is fair. We're concerned Giancarlo's health as well. Prosecution is ready to proceed.
You can take 5 minutes, Mary.
Your Honor, we really ask that during the closing, the prosecution closing, that I go back to finish constructing my demonstrative and then relocate myself to the better.
There's no problem. Yeah, feel free.
Yes, Your Honor.
Should we tell them the jury?
Yeah, but someone looks at the jury from not just talking to the neighbor.
The jury box for time.
Yes. Yes. I didn't want to come off rude. I'm sorry. Let me tell her what's really going on. Breathe. I think oxygen is doing so well. Breathe, settle down. It's okay. It's fine. You're good.
Libby, if I may correct
At least I didn't say,
So much.
before building council interrupted.
That was a bad one.
I remember that happening. That also made me laugh. Monique, you're still a woman.
I moved the. I moved Diesel all by myself.
I'm so proud.
Thank you.
Women have come a long way.
Referring to something we can care for.
Yeah.
Today is International Men's Day.
Is it actually?
Yeah. And there's just talks about it everywhere on social media.
Oh, so good.
Wait, it's what?
It's so bad. It's on Twitter.
What?
It's International Men's Day.
Why do they need a day? Oh, God.
Why is that?
Ron, at this point, I
You may.
I'm in today.
Okay, that's fine.
It's not 8.
Okay.
Yeah, fine.
Your Honor, may I be seated in the court stand in the jury?
I didn't go sit in the witness stand, so if you want to, go sitting. May I, Your Honor?
Of course. I'm sorry. You can leave when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Avery Bancroft was predisposed to pay. May it please the court, Ms. Beam, members of the jury. We all believe in this idea of the American dream. It's the hope that if we work hard and we play fair, we can be successful. It's part of what just makes us so great as a nation. But in Midlands, there's one casino owner who doesn't believe that idea applies to him, who doesn't believe that he has to play by the rules. And that's something that he's admitting to you today here in court. You see, by presenting a defense of entrapment, this defendant is admitting that he broke the law. He is admitting that he committed a felony. Now he wants to distract you from that. He wants you to believe that someone else was responsible for his actions. He wants you to believe that he was entrapped. But that's not just something he could tell you. It's something he was supposed to prove to you here today in a court of law. We as a prosecution, we're saying just the opposite. We're saying that the defendant was predisposed. That he was such a person and in such a mindset that he would commit this crime even without the influence of Officer Keenan. As the judge will instruct you, something we could prove to you by showing the level to which he participated in the crime. And that's just what we did. We called 3 witnesses to the stand, all of whom either saw or heard the defendant participating in this crime. Let's take a look back at what we learned today. Our story starts here, October 1st, 2014. This is an exciting day in Midlands. The Casino Commission, they just announced that they'll be handing out a bid. And this is a rare event, so people are thrilled. But none more so than the defendant. You see, not even a month goes by before the defendant is at the commissioner's door, in the dead of night, knocking. He's looking for drinks. He's looking for discussion. We heard as much today from Tracy Metzos about this meeting in November 2014. Now let's stop for a minute and think about what the defense would have you believe. They're trying to tell you that the defendant was induced. But if that's true, if that really is the case, then what was the defendant doing at the commissioner's doorstep in the dead of night, months before he ever even came into contact with Officer Keenan? That just doesn't make sense. Unless the defendant was never induced. Unless he was never entrapped. Unless the defendant has always been predisposed to pay. Fast forward a few months. An undercover officer by the name of Mickey Keenan has gotten wind of what the defendant is up to. And he decides to set up an undercover sting operation to catch this defendant in the act. He even enlisted the help of the defendant's assistant, Corey Hyde. Ms. Hyde took the stand today to talk about the meeting she set up here, March 31st, 2015, between herself, Officer Keenan, and the defendant. Dr. Warren picked up the story from there. He told you how he read each and every word that was said during that conversation. And at no point, at no time, did the defendant employ diversionary language. What does that mean? That means that when the bribe was brought up, the defendant didn't mention what nice weather we're having. Didn't say, hey, how about the Midlands Mets? The defendant didn't even come out and say, you know what, you gotta stop. What you're saying is making me uncomfortable. I have to leave. Instead, the defendant asked not once, but twice when the next time he could meet with the commissioner was. Well, let's stop and think again. The defense wants you to believe that Avery Bancroft was entrapped. But if that's true, if that really is the case, then how did he go from being an upstanding businessman to someone who would say thank you for greasing the wheels in a matter of 20 minutes, and less time than it would take you or I to get ready for work in the morning? Again, it just doesn't make sense. Unless the defendant was never entrapped. Unless he wasn't induced. Unless this defendant was always predisposed to pay. Now, the defendant, he did eventually get his wish. He got to meet with Chase Covington, the commissioner, here, April 13th, 2015. Because at this meeting, the defendant negotiated his price of the bribe, sealed the deal. With a stroke of the pen, with a 250K equals yes, the defendant committed a crime. And he also broke the American dream. Because you see, it wasn't about hard work or fair play or who had the best ideas. It's about who could lie and buy and cheat their way to success. And that's just not what we believe in this country. But on the defense, they want you to forget about that. They want to distract you from that by telling you there's some sort of conspiracy against the defendant. The conspiracy members of the jury, they called three witnesses to that stand today, all of whom are either the defendant himself or currently employed by the defendant. Even after all that he has been through, even after all of this, he is still trying to buy his way out of trouble. And that's just not what we believe in this country. But we as a prosecution have done just the opposite of the defense. We called three witnesses to stand today, none of whom have a stake in today's case. And that was our job. It was our duty to show you beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant was predisposed. That he participated. That's just what we've done. For that reason, we ask them to go back to the jury deliberation room. You find the one verdict. restores justice. The one verdict that rebuilds our American dream. Verdict that holds Avery Bancroft responsible for being predisposed to pay. Verdict of guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elwell.
Ms. Bean, would you like to lead this up?
Just the easel would be great. Thank you.
You're free to set up a demonstrative and proceed when you're ready, Ms. Bean.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the Court, Your Honor, Ms. Elwell, and members of the jury. Now, we represented the defense of Mr. Avery Bancroft in today's case. In order for us to win today's trial, we had two things had to happen, or one of two things. Either one, the prosecution had to fail to prove that Mr. Avery Bancroft was predisposed to commit bribery, or one, we had to prove that Mr. Avery Bancroft was induced, entrapped into committing bribery. And we had and have proved that by a simple preponderance of the evidence, or more likely than not that happened. That happened because Officer Mickey Keenan used Executive Assistant Corey Hyde as a conduit in order to place increased pressure upon Mr. Avery Bancroft, which is why he decided to commit bribery. But that isn't the only burden in today's case. The prosecution also had a burden that they had to meet in today's case. And that burden is still there. Right when my co-counsel, Mr. Carlos Zapata, walked up to this table, put his hand down on it, and told you that the burden rested on this table. He also told you that they had to meet beyond every single reasonable doubt, every single element of their charge. Their charge that Mr. Avery Bancroft was predisposed. But, members of the jury, it isn't until now that we can tell you what exactly each of those elements are. The elements that my co-counsel could not tell you at the beginning of trial. The elements that Ms. Elwell did not bring up within her closing argument. These are the 5 elements of predisposition. There are 5 different things that you have to consider today in order to decide whether or not Mr. Avery Bancroft was predisposed into committing bribery. The first, did Mickey Keenan initially suggest criminal activity? The second, was Mr. Avery Bancroft's reluctance to commit bribery? The third, did Mickey Keenan repeatedly pressure Avery Bancroft? The fourth, the level of participation on the part of the defendant. In this case, Mr. Avery Bancroft. And 5, does Mr. Avery Bancroft have a history of committing bribery or past criminal activity? Now today, we just had the burden of inducement. We just had to prove to you that Mr. Avery Bancroft was induced to commit bribery. Members of the jury, not only are we going to prove to you today, have we already proven to you today that he was induced, we're also going to prove to you how the prosecution has ultimately failed to meet each and every single element of predisposition. Let's start at the beginning. Now you heard Mr. Avery Bancroft on the stand tell you himself that he was strongly confident in her proposal until Mr. Mickey Keenan got a hold of him. Mr. Mickey Keenan made Mr. Bancroft doubt his proposal. Officer Mickey Keenan made Mr. Bancroft believe that the only way his proposal would ever be accepted was if he offered a bribe. But members of the jury, even when Miss Covington and Mr. Bancroft came together to meet, it wasn't either one of them that brought up the topic of bribery. It was Officer Mickey Keenan. He quickly changed the topic of conversation from the number of conference rooms there should be in a casino to how to make the deal more appealing for Chase Covington. Here, the prosecution's case has failed because this is an instance where Mickey Keenan initially suggested criminal activity. Now later on, during cross-examination, it was revealed that through the cross-examination of Mr. Reese Warren, that Officer Mickey Keenan deliberately lied to Corey Hyde. Specifically, he lied that he had evidence that Corey Hyde had committed criminal activity years ago. And he used this intimidation, this lie, in order to force Corey Hyde to set up multiple meetings with Avery Bancroft and Chase Covington. Here, the prosecution's case has failed. The level of participation comes into question here. Avery Bancroft did not make a single meeting that ever occurred. It was all conducted and set up by Corey Hyde as a result of Officer Mickey Keenan. Now later on, through the cross-examination of Reese Warren, it was also revealed that coaching was a big concern between Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde. If you're looking for hard evidence of this, members of the jury, look no further than this email exchange, where it says word for word that, at some point, you may want to suggest to Avery to do something to sweeten the pot. And it's very important that this comes from you and not me. Now later on, we also received testimony from Mrs. J. DeLory, who sat right there in that chair and told you that in her expert opinion, Mr. Avery Bancroft was not predisposed. In fact, she testified on the stand today that Mr. Avery Bancroft exclaimed in a heated moment, "That's it, I've had it, I am sick of being Keenan's pawn." Once again, the prosecution's case has failed, pursuant to jury instruction number 2 out of section 4. Was Avery Bancroft reluctant to commit bribery? Here it's obvious that he was. Now, at a meeting that occurred on April 13th of 2015, Mickey Keenan sealed the deal forever. During that meeting, Mr. Bancroft asked all of the following questions. Do you like my proposal? How many conference rooms should be in there? What should the square footage be? That all changed when someone picked up a pen and a napkin. That all changed when that same someone slid the pen and the napkin over to Mr. Avery Bancroft. That someone was Officer Mickey Keenan. Here, once again, the prosecution's case has failed. He's pressuring Avery Bancroft here. This is an example of inducement. Now, members of the jury, would you like to know what Mr. Bancroft did with the napkin? He picked it up and he wiped his face with it. It wasn't until Officer Mickey Keenan picked up a second napkin and a second pin and slid both of those things across the table that any true discussion of bribery ever occurred. Again and again and again, we can see instances of inducement that happened in today's case. Blackmailing Corey Hyde, even though Corey Hyde has no criminal record to speak of, inducement. Changing the conversation to how to make it more appealing for Chase Covington, inducement. Picking up a napkin and a pen while sliding it across the table, inducement. And telling him specifically, to Corey Hyde, that Avery needs to realize that someone needs to be made happy, and that someone is Chase Covington, inducement. But members of the jury, even if you do not agree with us today, that any of these things are instances of inducement, even if you think that it's too big of a leap to say that inducement came from Officer Mickey Keenan to Corey Hyde to Mr. Avery Bancroft, that still does not mean that you should vote in favor of the prosecution, because they have to meet these 5 different elements of predisposition. And they failed on each and every single one. First, did Mickey Keenan initially suggest criminal activity? He did. He specifically did this at the beginning when he changed the conversation from the number of conference rooms to how to make it more appealing. Secondly, was Avery Bancroft reluctant to commit bribery? Yes, he was. He even exclaimed at top volume, "That's it, I've had it, I am sick of being Keenan's pawn." Third, did Mickey Keenan repeatedly pressure Avery Bancroft? We can see instances of this from the prosecution's own evidence, which says specifically, you'll need to pitch more than ideas to Ms. Covington. You'll need to make this more appealing for Chase Covington. You better make Chase happy. He said these things repeatedly throughout the entire transcript. How often did Avery Bancroft set up meetings? Almost never. Does Avery Bancroft have a history of committing bribery? There is no evidence because it doesn't exist. Find Avery Bancroft not guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bean. So, is there a Rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, may I ask how much time I have left?
50 seconds.
50 seconds.
Three sentences, two napkins. That's what the entirety of the defense's case boils down to. 3 sentences and 2 napkins. They want you to believe it's enough to make a good man commit felony. I also want to clear up a few things Ms. Bean had to say about the law. Now, what this wonderful picture is missing, the greater than sign, is what Ms. Bean neglected to mention, is that if we meet our burden of predisposition, it doesn't matter if you believe he was induced. You still must find a verdict of guilty. One last point is the judge will instruct you. We don't have to prove every one of these elements to you. It's not what the law requires us to do. It's not what we had to do. But now what you have to do is hold Avery Bancroft responsible for being predisposed to pay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. They're done. All right.
Can someone handle the computer?
I do not know.
Money, can you?
Yeah, who knows how to work it? I don't want to mess it up. I will not be responsible for that.